Good morning, everyone. It is my huge pleasure to introduce our opening keynote, Professor Sven Bölte from the Karolinska Institute, where he is Director of KIND. When we were thinking about who we wanted to invite to be our opening keynote, obviously that's a big decision and a difficult decision, but as soon as Sven's name popped into my head, I knew that we had the right person to speak authoritatively, accessibly, and relevantly on the topic of neurodiversity. So I'm really thrilled that we're all going to have a chance to hear him this morning. Over to you, Sven.
Thank you very much to No Pressure. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Sabbath Mind Room. And thanks to everyone who was involved in making this conference possible. It's a great pleasure, obviously, an honor to be here and to get the first keynote. The title of my talk, now I need this clicker too. It's here. The title of my talk, oh, it went blue, interesting. However, it was more in Karolinska colors, more in violet, but now it's blue. But that doesn't matter. So the title of my talk is maybe a little bit generic, a little bit cryptic, but I promise you will understand in just a few moments what it's about. But before, I would like to tell you kind of who I am. So I'm a neurotypical researcher, I'm a psychologist, and I've been working with clinical research for about 25 years, mostly in child and adolescent psychiatry. But I'm also trying, and I hope I will be able to convince you that I'm trying to also allow other perspectives and be far more broader than that. This picture is not a test of attention to detail, but still maybe if you look, you may identify a person that you know. It's this guy there in this yellow jersey, that's me. I'm running, I can recommend running. But sometimes running is also a little bit boring. So when I'm running, I'm often, like other people, listen to podcasts. And there's one of my favorites, it's a German one, it's called How Do I Explain It to My Child? And the nice thing about that is that I do understand everything, because it's really kind of very educational. In the start of these podcasts, you always hear a child first saying, what? And then later on, why? So I thought that's a very good structure also to structure up my talk, to talk first about kind of what is this all about, and then why this is important. So about the what, I will talk about the ICF. It's a classification system by the WHO. It's called the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health. And I will try to convince you during this talk that it's an excellent framework for a more personalized assessment of strengths and challenges, and also to value and take into account the environment and the facilitating and the hindering roles of the environment. And I think if the ICF would be used more in societies, in the different systems that we have, both healthcare, the social system, education, then I think this could introduce a paradigm shift in how we look at neurodivergence and how we offer support and how we organize things to really make better lives for neurodivergent people and their families. For those who are not familiar with the ICF, it's a classification system in the family of classification systems of the WHO, and there are three major manuals. One is the ICD, and that's defining conditions, and that's what's all over the place in the world, together with another manual that is mostly used in mental health, the DSM. So that's really kind of extremely well established. And then we have the ICF, and the ICF is asking the questions, how are people living with a certain condition? And what are the many factors that are important for the functioning and how people are living with the condition? And then there are other manuals where, for instance, certain supports, etc., are classified. But I want to focus on the ICF. And if you want to read more about the ICF, you can go on the homepage of WHO, and you can read all about it, and you can download the manual and all the material that is there. But I will try to guide you through. So the ICF tries to understand how an individual is living, taking into account many perspectives. So body structures and functions, that would be kind of the biological part of it, but then also the activities a person has, the participation aspects, and then the many environmental factors and other personal factors. And it's looking at both abilities and disabilities, and when it looks at the environment, it is interested of, where are the barriers and where are the facilitators. And the idea is also that these many factors, that they're interactive. So they are not completely independent of each other, they're dependent of each other. So the things are interacting with each other. So again, this is what is in that model. So you have the body functions and structures, and that's more the biology. So where you have things that are important for neurodivergence, mental functions and sensory functions. But then you have those many aspects that are not part of, for instance, the classical classification systems that we use, which is the activities and the participation. So what is a person actually doing, and how well is this person kind of really included in society, accepted and tolerated? And then you have the many environmental factors, attitudes of other people, of the society, of groups. Is support accessible? How are other people approaching neurodivergent people, and so forth? So it's trying to take into account both the biology and the social aspects. And I understand that the word or the terminology functioning does not sound very nicely, especially in the UK, as I understand. So for me, it's very important to say that in the ICF, functioning is defined kind of differently. It is not impairment. It is not impairment in the ICF, and that's maybe kind of a misunderstanding. It is not about a reduced productivity of a person or something. It's about how do abilities and disabilities and activities and participation, how do they kind of emerge with an interaction with the many, many environmental factors. So it's a dynamic construct, and it takes not into account the person, but the many other factors around. So that's why the talk is called A Unique Person in Their World, because it tries to understand each and every one of us, especially those who having kind of conditions, and how are they doing in their everyday life. And the philosophy of the ICF is that it's neutral from an etiological point of view, so we are not necessarily asking where does this all kind of come from. It tries to value kind of the mental part and the physical part and the social part equally. And as I said, it's looking at a continuum of abilities and disabilities, not only at disabilities. And it's very important in the ICF that lived experience is the most important information source when we look at the ICF. So it's really, the idea is we cannot do anything, we should not do anything without involving and the consent of the person that we address. And the final goal of the ICF of working with the system is always equality and participation. So let's come to the why. Why is the ICF important? Well, the first thing, I think it's kind of time. I think it's time for a paradigm shift, and I think that's also one of the reasons why we're here and why there is this conference. We feel that especially the group of neurodivergent people is not treated as they should be in society. And we see that many services out there, healthcare, the social services, education, and the society as a whole, they have really not a plan or strategy or vision how to approach neurodivergent people and their families in a better way. There are a lot of question marks. So, and my hope is, and I'm convinced, that the ICF and embracing the idea of the ICF could be something that could help in doing this a lot better. I also think that the ICF is kind of catching very much the zeitgeist that we are kind of living. And again, I think that's why we're here. And that's rather an old quote by Milton Erickson. And you can read it yourself. And I think it's very nice telling, you know, that you simply cannot kind of try to fit other people, you know, into, you know, your concept. And society and many organizations, they have certain concepts, and somehow they always try to fit in the people into those. And that's very problematic, especially when we talk about neurodivergent people. Now you can say, well, and you're completely right, the ICF, that's just another system where we try to fit people in. And that's actually true. But I think it would also be naive to think that we can organize a society and services and organizations without having any system. I think that would be also a little bit naive to think. And when we acknowledge that, then I think the ICF is at least quite a good system to come closer to this idea of working and thinking more holistically. So even though it's not optimal, I think at the moment for me, that's the best that we could use when we want to do a paradigm shift, where we still need and have a system. A good thing with the ICF is also that it's not meant to be just a clinical system. It's meant to be understandable and usable by all people. Very, very many different professions, kind of all stakeholders, parents, relatives, and essentially in the end also neurodivergent people. So it's not a kind of an exclusive system. It should be accessible and it should be usable for everyone. One important thing is that it offers so many different opportunities to also look at the environment and how the environment is impacting on people and their families. And we have done just 2 years ago, on behalf of Swedish healthcare authorities, we have looked at how are clinical services, how well are they for children and adolescents with an autism diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis. And what people say, both clinicians and people who have leading positions in clinical departments and relatives, they say, well, you know, what we meet here is a high complexity of the system. We do not know how to navigate in it. You know, we need to wait in their queues. And we think there's an over-focus on assessment, and we're waiting a long time for assessment. And we do not know exactly if everything is evidence-based, and so forth. So you can see there is a lot of things probably that we can do better in the environment for neurodivergent people and their families that they themselves cannot change. And the same thing also for adult services. This is a very nice study, actually co-produced with autistic researchers in Germany, where this research group looked how competent are psychotherapists in Germany when it comes to autism. And they ask, do you feel confident when working with autistic people? Do you think that you have kind of support skills and so forth? And then they also asked knowledge questions. And what they found was that many psychotherapists were kind of good at, for instance, supporting people who are depressed or who have anxiety disorders. But you know, you see those yellow bars, they're all very kind of little. So that always says, you know, autistic people are, that's a group that psychotherapists actually have no good idea of. And we all know that the physical environment is extremely important for neurodivergent people. Everything that's around, you know, sensory processing. And it's not taken into account a lot. And again, that's something that we can make visible in the ICF if this is a barrier or a hinder. And we know, for instance, schools in Sweden, there's some schools who are now built, and they have these open landscapes, and you see children, you know, they run around, and there's no idea, you know, in those new schools how you can the environment, for instance, autism friendly, and it's not taking into account the many research findings that we have that shows how you can build a better physical environment. And the same is also true for the learning environment in schools. That's a study that was done by the Autism and Asperger's Society and Society Attention in Stockholm. Sorry, that's a lot of Swedish in here. But Swedish is important, of course. But I will walk you through. So this is a survey among these organizations and their members, where they asked, well, do you have a child with school absenteeism? So those who do not go to school any longer, without any kind of reason other than that they do not want to. And you see what the answers were, the explanation that parents had for this absence. And it was a lot, was around, the school environment, inefficient learning environment, and there was bullying, and there was the teachers were kind of not understanding them and so forth. And that just coming to school was a challenge. And my negative favorite is the lunch situation. That one 25% said, the lunch situation in the school is something that makes it impossible to go there for my child. It's maybe it's too loud, it's too tight. Maybe they have selective, eating, and it's not taking into account, and so forth. And well, we in Sweden, and I think many other countries, high-income countries, say, well, we are doing a lot for our students, but I think that shows we are doing not particularly much for neurodivergent students. I also think that the ICF is consistent with a lot of currently dominating research paradigms. For instance, those who address precision psychology, or precision even medicine, or precision education, where you try to find out what's the best specific support for a certain person. It's also consistent with ideas of positive psychologies, where are the facilitators? How can you work with strength? I think it's also consistent with, or if you do neuroaffirmative research, at least you also find things that are consistent with that. You can inventorize, for instance, all of the environment in a structured way. So I think there are many. It's also consistent with a lot of dominating research ideas at the moment. What's also exciting for people who are doing research is we have lots of huge data sets around the world, and they're a little bit hard to bring together. So what we want to do in research, we want to make the best sense of the data, and we would like to have big data, and for that it's important that you try to harmonize different data sets, and that has often been a problem. But if you use the ICF, you can harmonize a lot of the data, especially that's capturing, for instance, body functions or activities in participation, environmental factors, because you can link very, very many different measures to those categories, and then we can do a lot easier research using big data. I also think it can make administration more effective, and it gives more possibilities. Today, often, for instance, report in different settings are they're unwritten, so they're just their narrative. And the only thing that comes with a number is often the diagnosis. But if we would use all those, those codes that the ICF has, then we could also have more numbers for many, many different aspects of functioning, which could give more opportunities for research, and also, I think, could make administration far more effective. Then, very important, of course, is that we have so many possibilities also to value strengths that people have. And we know that there are strengths in autistic people. There's a lot of research on that. And we also know that there are strengths in ADHD. So, and the ICF, as it values abilities you can look at those and you can value those. And we know how important it is to look at strength, to look at preferences and interests, and work with those, not only trying to look at everything that's not working. What we mostly want to achieve for everyone in the world is a good quality of life. And the ICF is not about quality of life, But we also know that a lot of functionings, for instance, self-regulation functions or sleep functions, that they are a very good predictor for quality of life. So if you can self-regulate yourself, and if you have a good sleeping pattern, the likelihood of having kind of a better quality of life is a lot higher. So functions are important even for quality of life. Something that's also very important for me is that I think we have a little bit of controversy, or I know, everyone knows, we have controversy in that field, in the field of neurodivergence. And it's not, well, I think it's very important that we talk and that we have very many different ideas and attitudes about things. But in the end, I think it's also important that we, at a certain point in time, that we talk with one voice. Otherwise, we will not get other parts of the society and politicians to listen. And I think the ICF can reconcile things that people think maybe you cannot bring them together because we have people who are kind of working with a biomedical model and other people who are mostly working with a social model. And if we want to bring this together, I think the ICF makes sense because you have space in it for both medical aspects or biological aspects and many social aspects. So I think it could be something that brings together attitudes that maybe people think that we cannot kind of reconcile. Good. So that's the many things I think why the ICF is important. And now the question is, will it really happen? So is there a chance that this will happen one day? And I think there are barriers to it, and there are also facilitators. One of the biggest barriers is that we have those more traditional diagnostic systems, like the ICD and the DSM, and these are very old ideas. They have been established, as you can see. The first ICD came in 1929, and the DSM came in 1952. So these diagnostic systems that are they are really very strong. There's a very strong tradition in many, many systems and many societies in the way we work and the way we do research and the way we do kind of reimbursement in the systems and so on. So that's a bit of a hinder. It's a very, very strong tradition and routine, and you can see that the ICF came a lot later. Another thing is, I don't know if you're familiar with Donald Rumsfeld. He's maybe not a person that we need to remember too much, but I always loved, his classification system, because you can look at it kind of a million times and it's still very hard to understand. But I think when it comes to the ICF, we are here in the unknown knowns, because people have a good idea that, we need to change something, maybe also when we focus more on functioning and have a more holistic view and so. But those people are not aware of the ICF. I meet so many people who should be aware, but they're not. So that's kind of the unknown knowns. They know something should be changing, and if they would know, that the ICF is there and that's a good system, they would also use it. But many do not know it, and many people have not been raised, socialized with it. So it's not part of education. There are very, very few disciplines who have a good socialization, who have a good education in ICF when they are ready with their studies, when they're done. Another hinder is that a lot of people react like this when you suggest to them to do something different. And especially when it comes to the ICF, the reaction is often, well, other people should do that, that's too complex, it's too time-consuming, it's not possible in practice, and so forth. So these are a little bit the hinders. But then the facilitators, it's, the ICF has international authority. It comes from the WHO. And if there's any chance that we can establish a system that's more holistically in, for instance, healthcare and other parts, then I think it's probably something that the WHO is doing. Many people have very good ideas about changing things, but it lacks authority. And the WHO has kind of worldwide authority, and therefore I think if there's something that we can do and if we can achieve a paradigm shift in that area, I think the ICF is what will happen. There are also, around the world now, developments that take into account the ICF, for instance, the guidelines for autism assessment and intervention in Australia and also New Zealand. They're largely kind of taking into account the ICF. In Sweden, the Swedish Board of Health and Welfare, since 3 years, kind of recommend that you should do, functional assessments and the planning of support based on the ICF. In Germany, you have a participation law that requires when you want to have support in accordance with that law, you need to make a case based on an ICF description. And then, as I understand, here in the UK, there is this national strategy for autistic children, and there's one point that's about post-diagnostic assessment, and there's quite some interest in the UK that maybe the ICF should be something that is used within this post-diagnostic assessment. Another thing is that me and my colleagues and colleagues around the world and stakeholders have worked with adapting the ICF, sorry, try to adapt the ICF to, for instance, autism. The ICF in itself is quite a complex system, and it's not, and you understand, because of the idea that it has, it's not linked directly to certain diagnoses. But as we have built a society that is so kind of focusing on diagnosis, you cannot ignore this. So you need to kind of link the ICF to a certain, to the existing ways that people are working. And that's, and for making the ICF more accessible, it's very important that you somehow try to adapt it to certain diagnoses. And that is what we have done in the last 10 years, together with the WHO, with a center called the ICF Research Branch in Switzerland, and researchers around the world with kind of really a rigorous research process, taking into account many different perspectives and generating lots of data. And we have done the same thing also for ADHD. And these studies usually include a systematic review, an expert survey. They include clinical studies and qualitative studies where you interview a lot of people with those diagnoses, their parents, personal assistants, people who are very close. And then you bring all of this evidence to a conference where then there's made a decision, what kind of categories, what kind of extraction from the ICF is most important for a certain diagnosis. And that makes it far more easier to work with the ICF in different settings, because you do not need the whole system. You can work with a selection that makes sense for a certain diagnosis. And we have thereafter looked if this selection of the ICF dimensions, is this really kind of valid? Does it work in practice? And we have looked, for instance, when you look at employment of autistic people, when you look at how they do in school, how people were affected by the COVID pandemic and so forth, we can see that if you work with those core sets, so with this extraction that is adapted to a certain diagnosis, it covers most of the information that is important for instance, employment in this case, or for instance, for the effect of the pandemic. So it covers really broadly those dimensions that are important for how you live their life, how you live your life when you are neurodivergent, or for instance, also when you are a relative. So it seems too that these are valid, that they do work, that they cover the most important things. And then what we have done is we have taken this selection of categories from the ICF, and we have translated it. So we have operationalized it so that it's easier kind of to ask questions about it, and it's easier to answer those questions. And those are now on a platform, on a digital platform that we are at the moment piloting, and that we are evaluating, and hope that in maybe 2.5, 3 years from now, this is completely ready and can be used broadly in many parts of society. Yes, if you cannot get enough of the ICF after this talk, or you have not understand what I said, then there are also movies and they are on this homepage, icfcoursets.se, and they are in English. You can hear more about the ICF and functioning and those course sets that we have derived, so this adaptations to autism and ADHD, and also about this tool, this platform that we have developed. And then I need to thank a lot of people. So, of course, all of those who have sponsored our research and sponsored the platform, a steering committee that we have in the background who's giving us advice, all of the people who have been involved in doing this at the moment, doctoral student Lovisa and John, who's a postdoc, and previously Alice and Suhail and Aiko and Anna and Eric and Elena, and then, as I said, there have been many, many people around the world who have contributed to all of these studies. So I stop here, and just I hope that I could convince you that kind of you maybe start thinking more about ICF or in ICF terms, and you maybe also want to spread the good news to other people so that we get away from these unknown knowns. That is all I wanted to say to you today. Thank you.